Towns and cities burn in their death throes. The world writhes in agony. Death's daughter, the plague, reigns here, summoning crows to a gruesome feast. Corpses and bird-like masks of plague doctors litter the streets. Night is as bright as day from the glow of funeral pyres. From notes found during excavations of a colonial-era church in rural Massachusetts, hidden in a collapsed cellar, only a few know what truly happened in that distant year of 1692. Specialists translated the archaic English, adapting it for modern readers. The account was written by Father John, the village pastor who preached to the small community. I'm the only literate person here, recording these events because I must. I hope future generations uncover the truth about this cursed place and time. It was an ordinary day. People went about their business, farming, crafting, children playing with wooden swords carved by old Tom. Everyone seemed healthy. The sun beat down, making me sweat under my black robes. I spent the day as usual, sharing mead with the mayor. I may be a priest, but I'm human too. God sees this and doesn't punish me, so it must be all right. We talked until sunset. I stumbled back to the church, prayed, and went to bed. Morning brought voices outside my door. I dressed and opened it to find 3 horsemen. I recognized James, but the others were strangers. They looked haggard and trail-worn. "Father, some water, please," James asked. "We've come from the frontier, the French and their Indian allies. It was a massacre. We barely escaped." I brought water. The third rider seemed off, silent and sickly, perhaps wounded. "James, wait," I said as he prepared to leave. "Your wife, she's gone." His face fell. I showed him to the grave. He collapsed, demanded to know why God had taken her. I had no answer. The riders stayed one night. 2 left at dawn, but the sick one died in James's house. His body was covered in black sores. No one knew what it was. We buried him, but it barely looked human anymore. 2 days later, our doctor came with terrible news. People were falling ill with the same symptoms. Nothing he tried helped. Soon they began dying in agony. The graveyard overflowed. People begged me for help, to ask God's aid. I prayed ceaselessly, but the deaths continued. Even children died. How could God allow this? I began to doubt. The village was wiped out in a week. Somehow I survived. Bodies rotted in the streets, plagued by rats and crows. I decided to leave for Salem, hoping to reach the safety of larger settlement. I traveled on foot, seeing no one. At night, I slept on the ground, haunted by memories of dying children. My faith wavered with each step. One night I woke to a cacophony of crows. In the forest, I swear I saw small, eerie lights among the trees. A witch's Sabbath? I hurried on at first light. After days of travel, I reached a walled town. The guards were wary, but let me in when they learned I was a priest. Inside was chaos. Bodies in the streets, the stench of death everywhere. I spent the night hearing confessions and praying with the townspeople. Their fear and desperation was palpable. The next day I continued my journey. A week later I reached Salem. Sister Sarah, the head of a local convent, gave me lodging. The nuns seemed troubled. Sarah warned me not to speak of the plague to the novices. Apparently, one had recently been burned as a witch. "Strange things have been happening," she whispered. "The sisters say they see a dark figure in a black robe at night. Tell me if you see anything similar." That night, I saw it myself, a shadowy silhouette in the catacombs beneath the convent. What horrors await in this place? Only time will tell. 3 days later, strange occurrences began with one of the nuns, events that made me shudder and kept me awake at night. It all started in the catacombs beneath the convent, where I had seen that black silhouette. Sister Mary, a young novice, began acting peculiarly. She would stare blankly for hours, muttering incomprehensibly. When asked about it, she'd snap back to normal, claiming no memory of her behavior. One night I heard chanting from the chapel. I found Mary there, surrounded by candles, reciting what sounded like Latin backwards. When I approached, she hissed at me with inhuman strength. The next day, Sister Sarah and I decided to search the catacombs. The winding tunnels led us to a hidden chamber. Inside, we found an altar adorned with occult symbols and a book bound in what looked like human skin. As we examined the grotesque find, a cold wind extinguished our lanterns. In the darkness, I heard Sarah scream. When I relit my lantern, she was gone. Panic-stricken, I fled back to the convent. I gathered the remaining sisters and told them what had happened. Some were skeptical, but others admitted to seeing shadowy figures and hearing whispers in the night. We decided to send for help from Boston, but as we prepared a messenger, a thick fog rolled in, isolating us completely. Strange noises echoed from the woods, and crows gathered in unprecedented numbers on the convent grounds. That night, 3 more sisters disappeared, those remaining huddled together in the chapel, praying desperately for salvation. I tried to comfort them, but my own faith was hanging by a thread. As dawn broke, we heard horses approaching. Relief washed over us, thinking help had arrived. But when the riders emerged from the fog, my blood ran cold. It was James and his companions, the same men who had brought the plague to my village. But how could they be here, weeks later and hundreds of miles away? They dismounted, their faces hidden by plague doctor masks. As they approached, I saw the ground wither beneath their feet. The sisters screamed and scattered. I stood frozen, clutching my cross as James removed his mask. His face was a rotting horror crawling with maggots. He spoke, his voice a rasping whisper. "You abandoned your flock, Father John. Now it's time to shepherd the damned." The other riders removed their masks, revealing the faces of those who had died in my village. Behind them, a mass of shambling corpses emerged from the fog, all those claimed by the Black Death. As they closed in, I realized the terrible truth. The plague wasn't just a disease, it was something far more sinister. And in my flight, I had helped spread it across the land. My faith shattered. I fell to my knees as the horde of undead surrounded me. The last thing I saw was James reaching out with a decaying hand, welcoming me to join the ranks of the damned. This is where the manuscript ends, stained with what appears to be blood. What became of Father John, or the full extent of the horror he unleashed, remains unknown. But in the centuries since, there have been whispers of a dark plague that rises every few generations, guided by shadowy figures in plague doctor masks. Those who know the truth remain vigilant, for the Black Death may slumber, but it never truly dies. As the days passed in the convent, the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive. The disappearance of Sister Sarah weighed heavily on everyone's minds, and the remaining nuns whispered fearfully among themselves. I tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, leading daily prayers and offering comfort, but my own doubts gnawed at me relentlessly. 1 week after Sarah's disappearance, Sister Mary's condition worsened. She began speaking in tongues, her eyes rolling back in her head. The other nuns were terrified, some suggesting she was possessed. I wasn't sure what to believe anymore. Late one night, I was awakened by a blood-curdling scream. I rushed to the source and found Sister Mary standing over the body of another nun, her hands covered in blood. When she saw me, she smiled a twisted grin and said in a voice not her own, "The harvest has begun, Father John." Before I could react, she leapt out the window with inhuman agility. I raised the alarm, and we searched the grounds, but Mary had vanished without a trace. The next morning, as we gathered in the chapel to pray for our lost sisters, a messenger arrived from Boston. He brought news that chilled us to the bone. The plague had reached the city. The streets were filled with the dead and dying, and chaos reigned. Our isolated convent was now cut off from any hope of outside help. As fear gripped the remaining nuns, I decided to take action. I gathered a small group of volunteers to explore the catacombs, hoping to find answers about Sarah's disappearance and the dark presence that seemed to have invaded our sanctuary. Armed with torches and crosses, we descended into the darkness. The winding tunnel seemed to go on forever, and strange whispers echoed from the shadows. Eventually, we reached the hidden chamber where Sarah and I had found the altar. To our horror, the chamber had changed. The altar was now surrounded by candles made of human fat, and the walls were covered in symbols painted in what looked like blood. In the center of the room stood a figure in a plague doctor's mask, hunched over a book. As we entered, the figure turned. "Welcome, Father John," it said in a voice that sent shivers down my spine. "We've been expecting you." The figure removed its mask, revealing the rotting face of James, the horseman who had brought the plague to my village. But how could he be here? "You seem confused, Father," James said, his voice a rasping whisper. "Allow me to enlighten you. The Black Death is more than just a disease. It's a gateway, a means for something ancient and terrible to enter our world." He gestured around the room. "Your precious faith, your prayers, they're meaningless against what's coming. We are its harbingers, and you, Father John, have been chosen to witness its arrival." As he spoke, the shadows in the room seemed to come alive. Dark tendrils reached out, grabbing two of the nuns who had accompanied me. They screamed as they were dragged into the darkness. I raised my cross, shouting a prayer, but James just laughed. "Your God has abandoned this place, Father, but don't worry, you'll serve a new master soon enough." Suddenly the ground began to shake. Cracks appeared in the floor and a foul stench filled the air. From the cracks, a mass of writhing tentacles emerged, followed by something so horrific that my mind recoiled from the sight. It was vast, defying description, an amalgamation of rotting flesh, insectoid limbs, and pulsating organs. Eyes of various sizes opened across its surface, all fixing on me with malevolent intelligence. James knelt before the monstrosity. "The gateway is open," he intoned. "The Black Death has come to claim this world." In that moment, faced with a horror beyond comprehension, I felt something within me break. All my doubts, my wavering faith, were swept away by a tide of absolute terror. I turned and ran, abandoning my companions to their fate. I fled through the tunnels, the sounds of screaming and inhuman roars echoing behind me. When I finally emerged into the convent grounds, I was met with a scene of utter chaos. The sky had turned in sickly green, and the air was thick with the buzzing of flies. Corpses littered the ground, their flesh bubbling and transforming into something inhuman. Those nuns still alive were either mad with terror or already succumbing to the plague, their bodies twisting into grotesque new forms. I ran without direction, my only thought to escape this nightmare. As I fled, I saw other figures emerging from the woods, more plague doctors, their masks hiding faces I knew must be as horrific as James's. They seemed to be herding the transformed and the dying, guiding them towards some unknown destination. In the distance, I could see pillars of green fire rising into the sky, marking other locations where the barrier between worlds had been breached. For days, I ran and hid, witnessing the world I knew crumble around me. Towns and cities fell to the plague, their inhabitants either dying or becoming twisted servants of the horror that had been unleashed. Those who resisted were quickly overwhelmed. I saw militia and soldiers alike fall before waves of plague-ridden monstrosities. The very land itself seemed to be changing, warping into something alien and hostile. In my lucid moments, I realized that what I had witnessed in the catacombs was just the beginning. The Black Death wasn't just spreading across our land, it was transforming it, reshaping reality itself to suit the needs of whatever cosmic horror had broken through. As I write these final words, I'm huddled in the ruins of what was once a church. The irony isn't lost on me. Outside, I can hear the moans of the damned and the skittering of things that should not be. I don't know if anyone will ever read this account. Perhaps humanity as we know it is already lost. But if by some miracle these words reach you, know this: the Black Death is more than a plague. It's the end of everything we knew, and the beginning of a new, terrible age. To whoever finds this, if there's anything left of our world to save, don't make the mistakes I did. Don't run. Don't hide. Fight with everything you have, because the alternative is too horrifying to contemplate. May God have mercy on us all, though I fear we've long since passed beyond his sight. The manuscript lay hidden for centuries, its warnings unheeded, but the horror it described never truly vanished. It merely slumbered, waiting for the right moment to awaken once more. In the present day, a team of researchers stumbled upon the document during an archaeological dig near Salem. Dr. Emily Hawthorne, a historian specializing in colonial America, was the first to decipher its contents. As she read Father John's account, she felt a chill run down her spine, dismissing it initially as superstitious ramblings. But strange events began to unfold. Team members reported vivid nightmares and inexplicable illnesses. Local wildlife behaved erratically, and an unseasonable fog seemed to linger over the excavation site. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they had awakened something long dormant. She began to research similar historical accounts, finding whispers of plague outbreaks throughout history that defied medical explanation. As she delved deeper, she uncovered a pattern. Every few generations, there were reports of a devastating illness accompanied by inexplicable phenomena. And always, there were sightings of figures in plague doctor masks. Her colleagues thought she was becoming obsessed, but Emily couldn't let it go. She traveled to rural areas where the most recent anomalous outbreaks had occurred, interviewing locals and searching for clues. In a small town in the Appalachians, she found what she was looking for. An old woman, the sole survivor of a mysterious illness that had wiped out her village decades ago, told a tale chillingly similar to Father John's account. The woman spoke of dark figures guiding the sick, of nightmarish transformations, and of a presence that defied description. As she finished her story, she fixed Emily with a penetrating stare. "They'll be coming again soon," she whispered. "The cycle is nearing its end." Shaken, Emily returned to her hotel room that night, her mind racing. As she tried to sleep, she was jolted awake by a noise outside her window. There, in the mist-shrouded street, stood a figure in a plague doctor mask. Panic gripped her as she fled the town, driving through the night. She needed to warn someone, to prevent the horrors described in the manuscript from unfolding again. But who would believe her? As dawn broke, Emily found herself at the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta. Using her academic credentials, she managed to secure a meeting with Dr. Marcus Reeves, a leading epidemiologist. She laid out her findings, showing him the manuscript and sharing the stories she had collected. Dr. Reeves listened skeptically at first, but as Emily continued, his expression grew grave. "Dr. Hawthorne," he said slowly, "what you're describing, it aligns with some anomalous data we've been tracking. Isolated outbreaks of an unidentified pathogen exhibiting characteristics that defy known medical science." He pulled up a map on his computer, showing hotspots of these outbreaks. They formed a pattern, spiraling inward towards a central point, the same location where Father John's story had begun. As they studied the map, an alarm blared through the facility. Dr. Reeves's phone buzzed with an urgent alert. His face paled as he read it. "It's happening," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Multiple outbreaks reported simultaneously across the country. The symptoms, they match your description." Emily felt a wave of dread wash over her. They were too late. The cycle Father John had unknowingly started was reaching its culmination. Over the next few weeks, chaos engulfed the nation. The mysterious illness spread with frightening speed, defying all efforts to contain it. But it wasn't just a disease. Reports flooded in of impossible creatures sighted in infected areas, of reality itself seeming to warp and twist. Emily and Dr. Reeves worked tirelessly trying to find a way to stop the spread. They assembled a team of scientists, historians, and even occult experts, searching for any weakness in the otherworldly plague. As major cities fell and the military struggled to maintain order, they made a breakthrough. The manuscript held a clue, a reference to an artifact that Father John had dismissed, but which might hold the key to closing the gateway between worlds. With time running out, Emily led a desperate expedition back to the site where it all began. The land was transformed, barely recognizable as Earth. They fought their way through hordes of plague-twisted monstrosities, guided by the cryptic clues in Father John's account. In the depths of the catacombs, they found what they were looking for: an ancient seal, designed to hold back the cosmic horrors that sought entry to our world. It had been weakened over centuries, allowing the Black Death to seep through. As they worked to reinforce the seal, they were confronted by the leaders of the plague cult, the same figures in plague doctor masks that had haunted humanity for generations. A fierce battle ensued, reality warping around them as the two sides clashed. In the end, at great cost, Emily and her team managed to restore the seal. The effect was immediate. Across the country, the infected began to recover, the nightmarish creatures receded, and the fabric of reality knit itself back together. But the victory was bittersweet. Millions had died, and the world would never be the same. Those who had witnessed the truth could never forget. As she stood in the ruins of what had once been Boston, Emily knew that their fight wasn't over. The horrors beyond the veil would try again, seeking new ways to enter our world. She looked at the survivors around her. Scientists, soldiers, ordinary people who had seen the impossible and lived to tell the tale. They were forever changed, now guardians of a terrible secret. Emily picked up Father John's manuscript, its pages now supplemented with her own notes and findings. This record of humanity's brush with cosmic horror would serve as both a warning and a guide for future generations. For she knew that one day, perhaps long after she was gone, the seals would weaken again. The Black Death would seek to return, but next time, humanity would be ready. As she watched the sun rise over a world forever altered, Emily made a silent vow. The cycle that began with Father John's fateful encounter centuries ago would end with her. Whatever the cost, she would ensure that the horrors he witnessed would never fully manifest in our world again. The dawn of a new era had begun, one where humanity stood vigilant against threats from beyond the stars, armed with the knowledge of those who had faced the abyss and lived to tell the tale.